The winning blueprint presents.
In the Lab Room.
While you're here, go ahead and sub up. Welcome. You are in the lab room. I'm your host, Luke. Thank you for joining me. Today, we find out what's new in Tampa Bay. And this is courtesy of YouTube subscriber and my man, Double D, got the Bucks up. And we'll talk Tampa Bay Buccaneers football today and what's new in Tampa Bay. And for a team that changed the head coach and did the whole shuffle a season ago, there are an abundance of changes in Tampa Bay in 2013, and this is a different football team. And it's strange to say that because I thought the transformation took place in 2012 when you introduced your head coach in Greg Schiano and you brought in Bill Sheridan as your defensive coordinator. You brought in Mike Sullivan as your offensive coordinator and shuffled up the whole outlook of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise. But there was some drastic changes in this offseason, some big names brought in. The Buccaneers finally opened up the pocketbook. They opened up the checkbook and they started writing checks. And this is going to be a different ball club. And they're starting to, I guess, find some type of identity. I'm still not quite sure what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are. Who are these guys? I don't know them, but we're going to talk today about what's new in Tampa Bay. But before we can get to what's new, of course, you got to go out with the old in Tampa Bay. And one last reminder before we move on, if you want to see a team in particular be next here on the What's New In segment, simply leave a comment. Be the first to leave a comment at the bottom of this video stating next and the team that you want to see next here in this segment. So without any further ado, let's get to Out with the Old with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As usual, when I break anything down here in the lab room, I need the assistance of not only my big board behind me, but my trusty handy dandy pointer. I've got both. Let's get to the big board and talk Tampa Bay Buccaneers football. We'll start out with the old in Tampa Bay. And you got the same offensive coordinator, same defensive coordinator, same head coach, GM, so forth and so forth. So we immediately get to the players. And we start with wide receiver Steve Smith. Here's a guy that never played a down for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You signed him in the offseason, and you hoped that Steve Smith could be a guy that he's been throughout his career, a chain mover, a guy that on 3rd and 7 gets you 8, moves the sticks, gives you a fresh set of downs. But Steve Smith has been riddled with injuries of late, and I think they've taken its toll on his will to want to play football. And you get injured enough and you finally say, okay, enough with the surgeries, enough with the rehabbing. I'm done. It isn't fun anymore. And I think Steve Smith got to that point in his career. He was banged up with the Giants, moved on to St. Louis, was banged up there, was with the Eagles, had a cup of tea there, was banged up with the Eagles, and he just never really got his footing back under him after he tore his ACL with the Giants. And so Steve Smith retired from the National Football League, and you didn't get to see if he could come in and help your football team. So Steve Smith no longer on your football team. You look at wide receiver Sammy Strotter, and here's a guy that's extremely inconsistent, a guy that never really produced high numbers for you in Tampa Bay. Not a lot of production out of Sammy Strotter. And he's a guy that helped you somewhat on special teams, but wasn't a big contributor there either. So Sammy Strotter is a guy that's no longer on your roster, but you're not going to miss Sammy Strotter because he did not produce big numbers consistently for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You look at running back LeGarrette Blount. Here's a guy that got in the doghouse of one Greg Schiano and never found a way out. Simply put, he's a big, big running back that doesn't play big. Now, he's not the tiptoe burglar. He's not that bad. We all remember the run against Green Bay, and he looked like a grown man on that play, and that's what you want to see more out of with LeGarrette Blount, but you don't see that enough. What you get out of LeGarrette Blount is a guy that wants to jump and leap over everyone instead of using his big body to bowl over defenders. And so I don't know if Greg Schiano was ever a LeGarrette Blount fan, and he wasn't going to be utilized on this Tampa Bay Buccaneers roster. I think they felt like, hey, we got all we want with Doug E. Fresh. And then they go out and make some moves in the offseason, and they just felt like LeGarrette Blount didn't fit in the equation in Tampa Bay, wasn't in the future plans. They shipped him off to New England. Looks like the Patriots and the Buccaneers seem to like to do business with players that Greg Schiano feels like he doesn't have a need for. LeGarrette Blount fell under that category. He's in New England now, no longer a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. You look at tight end Dallas Clark. He's probably done. This was probably his last season in the National Football League. Has not been signed. Maybe he'll latch on with the team sometime during camp, but I thought he had a very productive 2012 season with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A solid guy. The speed and athleticism that once was there is now gone. He's a guy that still has probably the softest pair of hands in the league, still catches the football very well. Isn't going to create the separation he once did when he was an Indianapolis Colt. But if you throw him the football, and you saw this a lot last year, for the most part, he'll catch it. And I thought that he was somewhat of a safety blanket for Josh Freeman. And you always want your tight end to be someone you can rely on. I thought Dallas Clark was that for you last season. But he's no longer here in Tampa Bay. I think the Buccaneers are ready to see a guy like Luke Stalker kind of rise to the forefront and take over the tight end position, put a stranglehold on it. And in order for him to do that, a guy like Dallas Clark needed to be pushed out of the door. Dallas Clark no longer a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. You look at offensive tackle Jeremy Trueblood. And if you did a poll with most Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans, you'd probably be overwhelmed with the amount of fans that are happy to see this guy no longer in a Tampa Bay Buccaneers uniform. We all know the well-documented back and forth this guy had with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan base, and he's been a marginal player at best in his career in Tampa Bay. And so I'm pretty sure Buccaneers fans are singing, nah, 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 hey, 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 goodbye to Jeremy Trueblood. And I'm not too sure that he's not happy to be out of Tampa Bay himself. I think it was a very, very mutual splitting of the two. Jeremy Trueblood, now a Washington Redskin, no longer in Tampa Bay. You look at wide receiver Aurelius Ben. Here's a guy you drafted out of Illinois, looking for this guy to come in and do some serious damage. Really changed the game in Tampa Bay at the wide receiver position. It just didn't happen. And I don't know why, but it just didn't happen with Aurelius Ben. You tried this guy on special teams, really didn't do much there. You put him out wide, wasn't really a factor there. You moved him around, you gave him reverses, end arounds, you put him in the slot. Aurelius Ben just wasn't what you thought he was going to be. And so you let him off the hook. He's now in Philadelphia via a trade. And so let's see if a fresh start in Philadelphia is what Aurelius Ben needs to jumpstart his career. But he's no longer a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. You look at safety, Rondé Barber, as we move to the defensive side of the football. And that's probably one of my favorite Bucs. He's probably one of my favorite Tampa Bay Buccaneers of all time. This guy, you didn't hear much out of Rondé Barber all you saw was results on the field. And I'm pretty sure he could have played another year or two in the league, but there is definitely a sense of the Buccaneers trying to move on, getting younger in the secondary. You go out and you make some moves in this offseason. You drafted Mark Barron a season ago, and you see the wheels starting to turn in motion to get younger in the secondary. And I think Rondé Barber realized the writing on the wall. If he wanted to play, I'm pretty sure the invitation was extended to him. Hey, we'd love to have you back. He's a veteran presence and leader in that locker room. He's still playing at a relatively high level, but I think Rondé Barber knew it's time to go. It's time to go. And so a guy that I think ultimately will end up in the Hall of Fame, and it's rare in this day and age to see a player start his career and finish with the same team, especially when you play as long as Rondé Barber did. But I think that he'll be in the Hall of Fame, and it was one heck of a career for Rondé Barber. He's a lifetime Buccaneer, and he's no longer on your roster. It'll be very strange come training camp, come that first week of the season, not to see number 20 donning a Tampa Bay Buccaneers jersey. And Rondé Barber, no longer a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. You look at cornerback E.J. Biggers. He's a guy that got better over time. When he first came into the league, he was torched. Last season, as the evolution of E.J. Biggers continued, he got better. And he was rated right around 25th in terms of cornerbacks in the league. And there are a lot of corners in this league. And he was rated statistically 25th or 26th, somewhere in there in terms of cornerbacks and the ability to cover. And E.J. Biggers, you can see the progression. He's getting better. And I thought the Bucs should have held on to E.J. Biggers. He should have been a guy that you look to grow with in that secondary. The Bucs decided that, hey, we're going in a different direction. E.J. Biggers is now in Washington with the Redskins, reunited with his ex-head coach, Raheem Morris, who coaches the defensive backs in Washington. So E.J. Biggers no longer in Tampa Bay. I think he was a guy that I thought should have been back in Tampa Bay. And there are quite a few Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the defensive side of the football that I thought should have been back, and we'll get to that in a second. Next up, linebacker Quincy Black. There's a guy that's been solid for the Buccaneers at the linebacker position. Buccaneers are getting younger and better at the linebacker position. And I think Quincy Black was a guy that overachieved in this league. And he was solid for the Buccaneers, but a guy like Levante David comes and bursts onto the scene, and you get other guys involved, and all of a sudden, Quincy Black isn't a guy that you have to have on your roster. He becomes expendable. That's what he was. He's no longer a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. You move on to defensive end Michael Bennett. Here is another guy on this defensive side of the ball that I thought should have been back. There's no reason that Michael Bennett should not be on this roster. He wasn't trying to break the bank. Maybe you didn't think he was worth what he was asking for, but it wasn't preposterous. It's not like he went out and got this astronomical deal. He signed a meager 2-year, $7 million deal or 1-year, $5 million deal, one or the other in Seattle. And essentially, it's a prove-it deal. He's looking to get paid big bucks, but no pun intended. But he should have still been in Tampa Bay. I thought he was one of your better pass rushers in 2012. And I thought that he's got upside. He's still got more room to grow as a pass rusher. And I thought that he should have been doing that growing, that maturing in Tampa Bay. And he's a guy that moved on. There was some bad blood there in terms of the whole process of trying to re-sign him, and he felt slighted. The Buccaneers felt like they offered a very good deal to him, and he felt very, very slighted. He felt like the Buccaneers didn't want him. He felt like they didn't aggressively enough come after him as a free agent, and so he's now in Seattle. You look at defensive tackle Roy Miller. I thought this was a guy that was essential for you to sign. If Michael Bennett got away, fine. Even though I thought he should have been back, okay, fine. But Roy Miller is one of those unsung heroes. He's one of those guys that you don't talk about. He doesn't fill up the stat sheet. Quietly, though, he does his job, and he does it at such a high level that he allows others to do their job even better. And I thought that he played really well on the interior of this defensive line. I thought he was someone that you should have had back. I thought he played well enough next to Gerald McCoy that this was a defensive tackle duo that you could build around on this defensive line. Instead, you let Roy Miller walk away, a guy that I thought should have been back in Tampa Bay. He's now in Jacksonville, and it's unfortunate when you're trying to build a team. Guys like Roy Miller shouldn't get away. He shouldn't be slippery enough to slip through your fingers and go elsewhere. When you're building a team, it's guys like Roy Miller that help you fill out your roster with solid players. And he wasn't a guy that commanded a lot of money. Once again, Buccaneers spent money in this offseason, but sometimes it pays to hold on to your own. And I thought that they let a couple of Buccaneers in Biggers, Bennett, and Miller slip away that I thought could have been back. You could argue that E.J. Biggers has been marginal or solid at best. And if you wanted to let him go, fine. I get that. Michael Bennett burst onto the scene last year, getting to the quarterback, and you felt like, hey, we don't want to overpay for this guy. Okay, but Roy Miller was a guy that should have been back on this roster. I feel like the Buccaneers really let one get away in Roy Miller. We'll see how he pans out in Jacksonville, and we'll see how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers respond at the defensive tackle position. But Roy Miller, I thought, was a guy that should have been back in Tampa Bay. So that is out with the old with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now let's go in with the new with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So you look at in with the new with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this is a pretty long list. And I talked about a lot of the changes early on in this episode, and I talked about the Buccaneers really making a lot of wholesale changes. You got the same coaching staff, but I think what Greg Schiano is trying to do and what he did in his first season was he started to cleanse this roster of guys that he felt weren't a part of the movement and a part of what he was trying to create in Tampa Bay. And what you see before you is a list of guys that he feels like can help build this roster the way he wants to. Now, are all of these guys going to make this roster? Absolutely not. But there are some guys in here that are definitely going to be on this roster that they went after aggressively in free agency or trade. And there's some guys on this list that have a shot to make this roster. So let's go over this list and talk about all of these players that are in with the new with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You start at the running back position with Jeff Demps. Here's a guy that was signed by the New England Patriots. And we all know Jeff Demps ran track for the Olympic team. He's a burner. This guy can flat out run. Got injured, never played a down for the New England Patriots. And they subsequently released him out of football. Now he's got an opportunity to play with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If he can stay healthy, this guy can run. He's one of the fastest players in the National Football League. We're talking about world-class speed. And so anytime you can put that on the football field, it's a dangerous asset. So that in itself gives Jeff Demps a chance to make this roster. We'll see how that works out in Tampa Bay. You look at running back Brian Leonard, and this is one of those classic cases of an ex-college coach going back and reaching and grabbing one of his old players, a guy that he can rely on, a guy that he trusts, and that's exactly what Brian Leonard is, a guy that went to Rutgers, played for Schiano. Schiano knows him, knows what he brings to the table. He's a hard-nosed blocker, a guy that can catch the football, can run it as well. He's a very versatile player out of the backfield, and I think Greg Schiano values that in Brian Leonard. He's going to add a dimension out of the backfield that the Buccaneers did not have from the fullback position because I don't think Brian Leonard is a running back in this league. I think he's going to be utilized more so as a fullback that can come, catch it out of the backfield, and stick his nose in there and block. And every now and again, toss him a little bone, hand him the football. He can run it as well. You look at wide receiver Derek Hagan. Here's a receiver that I've talked about numerous times. And I always envisioned Derek Hagan being better than what he has been in his career. And we're talking about a guy going into his 9th season in the league. He's played for 4 different teams. The Buccaneers would be his 5th in 9 years. So we're talking about a little under 2 years per ball club. Seems like he changes addresses every year. Never has had a season where he started more than 4 games. Has never had a season where he's caught more than 30 balls. Has never had a season where he's caught more than 400 yards worth of balls. And so he's a guy that never really gets an opportunity to show what he can do. And I think he's a solid player. And maybe he'll latch on in Tampa Bay. Maybe he won't. I feel like the Buccaneers are slowly acquiring talent at the receiver position. And I think it's going to be hard for Derek Hagan to make this roster, but we'll see. You just never know. Maybe he shows what he can do, impresses the coaching staff, latches on, and has an impact on this roster in 2013. You look at wide receiver Kevin Ogletree. Now, you went out and you sought after this guy in free agency from the Dallas Cowboys. He's someone that you're looking to put in a slot. He's definitely going to push a guy like Tyquan Underwood for a lot of playing time in that slot. We know that your receivers out wide are set. No one's taking Vincent Jackson's position. No one's taking Mike Williams' position. And so you're looking for Kevin Ogletree to come in and man up that slot. Tyquan Underwood right now is holding down that spot, but I think that the Bucs feel like they can get more production out of the slot, and they're looking for Kevin Ogletree to provide that. He's been inconsistent. He had that wonderful opening game last season against the Giants that helped the Dallas Cowboys upset them on that opening Thursday night game. And then he just fell off the face of the earth. And so if Kevin Ogletree can be more consistent, you might be getting yourself one heck of a ball player because this guy can run as well. He's not as fast as Tyquan Underwood, but he can run and he can make some plays. And we'll see if Kevin Ogletree is what you want him to be. So if you're a Buccaneers fan, you're saying, more Ogletree, please. We'll see. You look at tight end Tom Crabtree. Tattoo Tom is what I call him. And Tattoo Tom is coming to Tampa Bay. He was a backup in Green Bay. In limited duty, this guy caught the football. He made some things happen, blocked, did a little bit of everything with the Packers. Think you're going to give him a little bit more of a bigger role in Tampa Bay. You're going to allow this guy to catch a little bit more passes. He's very athletic, sneaky even as a tight end. And so he'll get behind you. He had a 80-yard touchdown reception last season. And so don't sleep on Tom Crabtree and his ability to make plays. I think the Buccaneers recognize that, and they're going to give him opportunities to make plays in the passing game for this team. So look for Tom Crabtree to be a very big acquisition, a quiet one, but one that pays off big dividends in 2013 and possibly moving forward. You look at another tight end, Zach Miller, and this is why a guy like Dallas Clark isn't back, because you go out and you get other tight ends that are younger that you feel can bring a little bit more to the table. And Zach Miller is one of those tight ends that he can block, he can occasionally catch a pass. He's just solid all the way around. He's not going to fly by a defensive back or a safety or a linebacker. He isn't going to create massive separation. He's just going to catch the football if you throw it to him. He's just going to block guys. He's just going to do whatever he needs to do to earn playing time. He's solid. He's not great at one thing. He's just solid. And so if he makes the team, I wouldn't be surprised. If he doesn't, wouldn't be surprised there either, because he's just an average tight end in the National Football League. You look at offensive lineman Gabe Carimi. This is a guy you traded for from the Chicago Bears, and you're looking for Gabe Carimi to come over and compete. Now, what do you have in mind for Gabe Carimi? Not sure. In Chicago, they bumped him inside to guard. He was drafted to be a tackle. They didn't like what they saw out of him at the tackle position. They bumped him inside to guard. You go and get him. Maybe you're able to coach him up and get him to be confident again in playing at the tackle position. Maybe you like him as a guard. Don't know what you have in store for Gabe Carimi, but I do know this. He will add offensive line depth to your football team. I expect Gabe Carimi to be on this roster and look to penetrate this offensive line somehow. You look at defensive end, George Selvey. Here's a Florida native guy, played at the University of South Florida, was a big time player for a while and then was overshadowed by Jason Pierre-Paul, who took off in his senior season, got into the National Football League and did big things. And George Selvey was the forgotten man. He gets into the league and he doesn't do much. He's been relatively quiet, and so now George Selvey is coming back home. He played his collegiate ball literally at Tampa Bay. He played at Raymond James Stadium. That's where South Florida played their home games. And so he's coming home. Maybe this is that wake-up call. Maybe this is exactly what George Selvey needs to really jumpstart his career. Because if he doesn't make it happen in Tampa Bay, I think his career could be over in the National Football League. You look at defensive back Michael Adams. Solid player, solid defensive back from the Arizona Cardinals. He'll come in. He's a veteran. He knows how to play the game of football. He'll tackle. He can cover. He's not going to knock your socks off with anything that he does. He's not an imposing figure out at the cornerback position, but he's a solid replacement for a guy like E.J. Biggers. He'll come in. He'll do his job. He'll play special teams. He'll do everything you need him to do. Michael Adams, definitely a solid acquisition to this football team. You look at the big fish, the big catch of the offseason if you are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This was the twinkle in the eye of the Buccaneers all offseason long. They wanted this guy, and they got their man. Of course, I'm talking about cornerback Darrelle Revis. And this is the thing that you don't know. The unknown, the variable with Darrelle Revis. He's coming off of an injury, and a serious one at that. We're talking about an ACL tear. How will this guy respond? How will he come back? Will he be the guy that owned Revis Island, or will he be a guy that needs some time to get back to form? We don't know. You don't know. That's why the contract that he signed essentially is a year-to-year contract that allows the Buccaneers to evaluate him on a year-to-year basis. Revis is betting on himself. The Bucs are betting on Revis. And so if it doesn't work out, the Bucs can get from underneath the contract with no strings attached. If it does work out, the Bucs will be paying this man handsomely each and every single season. And so we'll see what Darrelle Revis can bring to the table. But if he's the guy that he was before the injury and that you think he's going to be post-injury, you've got yourself one of, if not the best corner in the league. And that can go a long way to helping this defense really shut down a team like the New Orleans Saints. You can't stop them, but you can definitely contain them with a guy like Darrelle Revis on your football team. So the Falcons, the Saints, the Panthers, all of these high-powered offenses will be slowed down with a guy like Darrelle Revis on your team. And what you're doing in that secondary is really building a foundation for a defense that you're trying to make dominant again, like the one that won you a Super Bowl in 2002. So you look at the next acquisition, and here's another guy. I just talked about how you're building this secondary. You drafted Mark Barron. You go out and get Darrelle Revis, and then you go out and tag team him up with Deshaun Golson. And here's a guy that was the heart and soul, I think, of that San Francisco 49ers secondary. For how good Patrick Willis was at the linebacker position for the 49ers, Deshaun Golson was equally as good out in the secondary. And I thought that he was the quarterback back there of that defense. He made a lot of plays. He was always around the ball. He's physical. He tackles. He hits. He can make plays on the football. He catches the ball when it comes in his general vicinity, whether it's outside of his frame or he has to leap up or it comes straight to him. Deshaun Golson is a playmaker. He's a difference maker. And you put Revis on the field, you put Golson on the field, you put Barron on the field, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of guys that can make things happen in your secondary. Really love what the Buccaneers are doing, trying to make teams make mistakes. And if they do, you've got guys in that secondary that can make them pay for those mistakes. So Deshaun Golston, a huge offseason catch for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who finally decided to open up that checkbook, stroke a few checks, and get some guys on this roster that can make a legitimate difference. You look at linebacker Jonathan Casillas, another guy that comes in and has been playing really good football. Coming from the Saints, you're stealing a player away from a divisional foe, bringing him onto your roster. You know what Jonathan Casillas can do. You've seen him twice a year for the last 3 or 4 seasons. He's getting better each and every season. And so you add him to the mix at the linebacker position. You feel really good about this acquisition. I think this is a really good signing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a guy that's a tackling machine, very athletic, can make some things happen. I love the signing of Jonathan Casillas. You look at defensive tackle Derek Landry. This is the replacement for Roy Miller. And he's much like Roy Miller in the sense that he's a guy that brings the hard hat and the lunch pail, human-like, gets the job done. No one talks about him, but he quietly goes about his business and gets it done. And so I do like the signing of Derek Landry because I think he's an unsung hero type of guy, much like Roy Miller. I would have preferred, though, if you would have just hung on to Roy Miller, but I won't continue to hang up on that. Let's talk about Derek Landry and what he can bring to the table. I think this is a guy that is extremely strong at the point of attack, isn't going to get pressure on the quarterback, but he's going to do his job in a run game, and he's going to help you stuff up the middle of this defense. He's very solid, somewhat underrated, and I think you're going to like what you get out of defensive tackle Derek Landry. And so now you go to special teams players. You go with punter Chaz Henry. There's a guy coming over from the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't really think this guy is a really good punter. I really don't like Chaz Henry. He's inconsistent. You'll get a 57-yard boot out of him, and then he'll shank one out of bounds for a net of 22 yards. I can't deal with that with punters. And so I don't think Chaz Henry is a guy you want punting the football for you. We'll see if he sticks around in Tampa Bay or not. But I'm pretty sure if he has a couple of those yank jobs, he'll actually be yanked out of Tampa Bay. You look at kicker Nate Kading. Here's a guy that you bring in just to foster a little bit of competition between he and Connor Barth. Look, I'm a big Connor Barth fan. Anytime you bring me a young, big-legged kicker like Connor Barth that can drill it from 57, from 54 consistently, I don't have any problems. Yeah, Connor Barth missed his fair share of kicks, but this guy is a very young and talented kicker. I don't see Nate Kading running this guy out of Tampa Bay. I just think it's a healthy competition. You always got to keep your kickers on their toes unless they are a kicker that doesn't miss, that's automatic, that you trust. Then you leave them alone. But I think he's consistent enough as a field goal kicker and has a huge leg, big enough that he'll be able to ward off a guy like Nate Kading, who is coming back trying to find his way onto an NFL roster. I think Nate Kading will latch on with someone. I just don't think it will be here in Tampa Bay. So those are all your players that you have acquired via offseason acquisitions or trades. Now let's talk about players in your draft class. You look at defensive back Jonathan Banks in the second round, quarterback Mike Glennon in the third round, defensive tackle Akeem Spence in the fourth round, defensive end William Golson in the fourth round, defensive end Stephen Means in the fifth round, and running back Mike James rounds out your draft. And if you're looking for a thorough breakdown of each of these players, I will redirect you to my NFL 2013 draft wrap-up series that I did on every single team in the National Football League, including the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So if you're looking for an extensive breakdown of these players and this draft, go there for that. And now we'll go from players that are going to make this roster or have a very good chance to those who don't have a great chance of making this roster. Of course, I'm referring to those undrafted free agent rookies. Let's talk about those guys right now. So As you look at this list, Buccaneers have 10 players on this list as undrafted free agent rookies. Wide receiver Timothy Wright out of Rutgers, wide receiver Jerry Johnson out of UCLA, running back Matt Brown out of Temple, offensive tackle Jason Weaver out of Southern Miss, offensive tackle Jace Daniels out of Northern Michigan, offensive tackle Bryce Schwab out of Arizona State, offensive guard Adam Smith out of Western Kentucky, defensive back Brandon Smith out of Georgia, defensive back Rashawn Melvin out of Northern Illinois, defensive back Devron Carr out of Arizona State, and Khalil Gauld out of Rutgers rounds out the group. Don't be surprised if one or two of these guys make the roster. With all of the changes in Tampa Bay, nothing is certain and no one is safe. So expect a lot of competition and these guys actually having a legitimate chance to make this roster. But at the end of the day, expect one, two, or maybe even none of these guys to crack this roster in Tampa Bay. We go from there, and that wraps up the in with the new portion of this Tampa Bay Buccaneers football team. Now let's talk about any philosophical changes in Tampa Bay. So as you look at the philosophical changes for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you got the same head coach in Greg Schiano, same offensive coordinator in Mike Sullivan, same defensive coordinator in Bill Sheridan. So not a lot is going to change in terms of scheme and philosophy. What you're looking at is different players coming on board, which allows the team to kind of tinker with certain things. For instance, on the defensive side of the football, you can be more aggressive when you've got a corner like Darrelle Revis on one side of the field. You can be more aggressive when you've got a ball hawking safety like Deshaun Golston on one side and then a hard hitting safety like Mark Barron on the other. So that allows you to take chances and risk that maybe you wouldn't have taken a season ago when that corner out there was EJ Biggers instead of Darrelle Revis. And so I think the defense is going to be a little bit more aggressive. You might see a little bit more blitzing out of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because what you want to do is continue to be what you were as a defense against the run. You were dominant against the run last year. Stop the run, force teams into third and long, then go after them because you can play man-to-man coverage, because you can put pressure on opposing offenses, not allow receivers to run off the line of scrimmage with free releases, get in their face, disrupt the routes, cause them to have their timing be a little bit off, force the issue, force some errant throws, force turnovers. Anything that helps this offense out and helps this offense put points on the board is going to be something that the Buccaneers want to establish in 2013. This offense always seems to struggle to score points. And if this defense can find ways to generate offense themselves or generate turnovers that help the offense put points on the board, this team can do some damage in the NFC South division. I was listening to some other YouTubers talk about this division in the NFC South, and they just totally disregarded the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They talked about the Panthers and Cam Newton and him going into his third season. They talked about the New Orleans Saints and them getting their head coach back. They talked about the Falcons being one play away from the Super Bowl. And they talked about Roddy White and Julio Jones and Matt Ryan, Steven Jackson coming over to the Falcons. They didn't mention the Buccaneers at all. They just dismissed them as a team that has absolutely no shot in this division. And I find that hard to believe. We act as if the Buccaneers didn't go into Atlanta, a game that the Falcons wanted to win, and beat them. We act as if they didn't beat Carolina twice last season. We act as if they didn't have the Saints on the ropes. Now, they were absolutely drubbed in New Orleans, but they had the Saints on the ropes in Tampa Bay, and they let them off the hook. And so this is a Buccaneers team that can compete in this division. And if teams aren't careful with Darrelle Revis now and Golson and Barron, and you still got Gerald McCoy playing at a very high level, and if you're not careful, Tampa Bay can sneak up on some teams and do some things. You look at the offensive side of football, and again, same coordinator, and you're looking for Mike Sullivan to do what he did with Eli Manning to Josh Freeman. He was really huge in the development of Eli Manning, and I think that Eli Manning took that next step when Mike Sullivan got his hands on him. And if you are a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan and you believe in Josh Freeman, this is the year you got to see it from Josh Freeman. You got to see him take that next step. Those 4 interception games can't happen. You can't have a dud like you had against the St. Louis Rams. You can't have a dud like you had in the Dome against the New Orleans Saints. You can't have those games where you just are the reason your team loses the football game. He has to be more consistent. He's got those weapons outside. There is no excuse. He's got a stellar running back behind him in Doug E. Fresh. There is absolutely, positively no excuses for Josh Freeman. He has to get it done, and a huge part of him getting it done is going to fall on the shoulders of one Mike Sullivan. Have to highlight his strengths, get him moving again. I think when Josh Freeman is at his best is when he's mobile, when he's not afraid to tuck it and run, when he's getting out of the pocket and bootlegging, using that sneaky athleticism and that big arm of his and making things happen. When he stands flat-footed in the pocket and isn't willing to move out of that pocket, that's when bad things happen. And so I think Sheridan needs to find a way to get Josh Freeman comfortable again with moving around, using his legs to create, and also making sure that the running game is the focal point of this offense. Run the football, play action fake off of it, and let Josh Freeman use that big arm to push the football down the field. You have targets that will go up and make plays in traffic for you in Mike Williams and Vincent Jackson. So I expect this offense to be somewhat more aggressive, but I expect them to find ways to get Josh Freeman to be more comfortable, less turnovers, smarter play with the football, and a lot, and I mean a lot, of Doug E. Fresh. And so, there you have it. That's what's new in Tampa Bay.
Like the content? Want more? Sub up.